What I'm about to tell you about the solar eclipse on April 8th is gonna blow your mind.
On April 8th, there's going to be an eclipse.
This solar eclipse.
Solar eclipse.
Solar eclipse.
Solar eclipse.
Solar eclipse.
Solar eclipse.
Solar eclipse on April 8th will blow your mind.
Blow your mind.
What I'm about to tell you will not blow your mind. It's worse.
It's absolutely going to blow your socks off.
Shocking part is this eclipse is going to be passing through 8 towns called Nineveh,
and also through, get this, Rapture.
The Rapture, Indiana.
Jesus mentions an evil and perverse generation looks for a sign.
Well, the world is ending next week, and I thought it would be important to let you know. Big news, caught me off guard, but on April 8th, there's going to be an eclipse, and that is allegedly a sign of the times, a sign that is
fulfilling thousands of years worth of biblical prophecy.
So next week, the world is ending, and I just wanted to let you know, because what I'm about to tell you will blow your mind. So what's actually going on here? Well, people are looking at the path of the solar eclipse, and they are pointing out that, I guess, along the way, the solar eclipse will pass over 8 cities called Nineveh, and then there's like a Joppa somewhere, and then I think like a Jonah, Texas, and a Rapture, Indiana, and like all of these Bible buzzwords. And at this point, it could literally all be made up, and I wouldn't know any different. And I'm not going to put in the effort to see if there are actually 8 Ninevehs in the North American region. I just don't care, because it kind of doesn't make any difference in the end. But anyway, it really matters to these people. And so they're pointing out that it's passing through 8 Ninevehs, but then also the path of the 2024 eclipse is then like intersecting with the 2017 eclipse that didn't bring the end of the world to pass. But anyway, the X, the cross there, that's the Alpha and Omega, and somehow that means it's the end of the world and the beginning of the new kingdom. Anyway, that's what they're saying. I'm not going to fact check them, because I don't feel like searching for all the Ninevehs and the Jonahs and the Joppas in the United States. I just don't care that much. But I do care about where they're getting this from. So it's all coming from Matthew 12, and they like to cite Jesus in his discussion on the sign of Jonah, and they say, oh, look, Jonah, Texas, Nineveh in America, Rapture, Indiana. This must be the sign of Jonah that Jesus was talking about. And that's just where we are. The best way to try to understand what they're saying is to look at their chosen source text, which is Matthew 12, 38 through 39. And for whatever reason, they stop right before the verse that really explains their source text. Maybe for a lot of people who do this, they kind of jump on the trend and see the content side of it, which is why there's such a carbon copy model of like literally the verbiage is almost exactly the same on all of these videos that are circulating. But somebody at some point was just negligent in how they understood scripture. So they look at Matthew 12, which reads, "Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, 'Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you.'" Now, context here, previous verses show that there's been kind of a back and forth between Jesus and the Pharisees over miracles that he's performing, because the Pharisees accuse Jesus of performing miracles in the power of demons rather than the power of God. So the Pharisees and Jesus, they are interacting. They've been interacting for the majority of this chapter. But then, out of nowhere, after accusing Jesus of, doing things in the power of demons, then they come at him and say, well, we demand a sign, really to show proof of what Jesus is saying, and that is that he is God doing this work in the name of God. So they ask for a sign, and here's his response. And what's so interesting is that a lot of these TikTokers, these influencers, they will use this verse in a way that somehow supports them seeking out a sign for the times. So Jesus responds, he answers them, and he says, an evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, there is a really important biblical principle to follow, and that is whenever you're performing exegesis, you need to understand the audience that the speaker is speaking to. So Jesus is obviously speaking to the people of that current generation, and he is accusing them of being evil and adulterous. Remember, he's speaking to the Pharisees, and he says, I'm not going to give you a sign, but rather you have a sign already, and that is the sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, these TikTokers, what they do is they take that verse and they say, oh, see, there's a sign of Jonah, and then they nitpick all of these maybe facts. I've seen some people kind of debate the legitimacy of some of the things they're claiming to be fact, but anyway, they're latching onto these things and they're saying, okay, sign of Jonah. There's a sign out there, the sign of Jonah. What could that be? What could that be? And then they abandon what Scripture says and they try to find it elsewhere. And what's so ironic is that Jesus immediately follows up by saying, for just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. That was it. That's the sign. Just like Jonah was 3 days in the fish, so will Christ be in the earth. He's pointing towards the death, burial, and resurrection of himself, and really he's starting to preach the gospel to the Pharisees. And it's ironic because we're wrapping up Easter, and a week later we're now seeking a sign right after we celebrate the actual sign of Jonah, and that is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So it's just, I don't want to say interesting. It's something. It's something. I just find it to be unique that people so close to the foundation of our faith are looking for external signs, which speaks to the heart of our generation. It's really telling, but it's funny that they want to use Matthew 12 as a defense of their claims when Matthew 12 is really a rebuke of what they are doing. We can talk all day about the rapture and looking for signs and things like that. The problem that we're facing is that people have been predicting the end of the world for a long time. People were certain that the rapture was going to happen in 1988. People were certain that it was going to happen in 1999. People were certain it was going to happen in 2012. And now here we are in 2024, and people are certain that it's going to happen. And people will go as far as to use Scripture, not use it, manipulate Scripture to back up their beliefs and back up these ideas that, hey, the end is near, it's coming, it's happening. You've got to be prepared that in 7 days the world is going to end. I'm all for being ready for Jesus to come back. You ought to live like he's coming back at any moment. However, I really get tired of the date setting and the doom and gloom presentation of like it's always going to end and we always need to be ready for the worst to happen. That's why I am more drawn to an optimistic eschatology. Regardless, you have these people with tens of thousands of subscribers, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, followers, viewers, and they're propagating these ideas. And I feel like it's important to take a step back and ask the question, what if they're wrong? Now listen, if the rapture happens on April 8th, I will change my mind halfway up to heaven. However, what if they're wrong? They have now spread just massive distribution of a false teaching. And what's scary is that they'll go back onto TikTok and do it again. And I'll two things on that. One, it just shows the danger of the kind of this third-party content creator that's not accountable to any church, because this is something that people need to be held accountable to, in that you have spread false teachings, you've spread this false narrative surrounding Scripture. But then also, it just shows that social media is not your standard. It's really a dangerous place to get all of your theology. And so it's kind of this compounding issue of, you have these creators that aren't accountable to any church, and they can say these things and then continue to say these things again and again and again, because who are they accountable to? TikTok? But then on top of that, you have just the lack of accountability means there's no real reason to be orthodox in your doctrine. So that creates a dangerous place to get your doctrine from. So, I think it's fair to ask, what if they're wrong? Then what? What if I wake up on April 9th and the rapture didn't take place? And, the topic of the rapture aside, just kind of playing along, what if you're wrong? What if these people are wrong? Then what? And I think it's important with situations like this, where if there's no accountability in like a general sense, there at least needs to be a personal accountability on our part, that we say, okay, we need to make a mental note of what these people are saying and what they are falling prey to and propagating, because we need to be very intentional about who we allow to speak into our life and who we allow to preach to us. So I will place my bet. I plan on there being an April 9th. I don't believe the eclipse will be the end of the world and the beginning of the kingdom. If it is, that would be incredible. I think any time is a great time for Jesus to come back. And that ought to be a sobering thought to us. We should always be ready, always be anticipating the return of our King. So these guys they're just goofy. It's, same old. It's the rapture panic of the 80s and 90s in a world with TikTok. And so, there will be a panic in another 20 years, another 30 years, and it'll keep happening as long as there are people, because the church has been living in the last days about as long as it has actually existed. So these things just come with the territory. However, don't let Matthew 12 be misused to say that we are somehow receiving a new sign of Jonah, because the true sign of Jonah is the death, burial, and resurrection, the gospel of Jesus Christ that was preached to the people then, and they rejected it, but it is still preached today, and we ought to embrace it and look for nothing more, because there is nothing better.